3, 2, 1.
The Global Sanitation Graduate School is the world's largest platform for capacity building in city-wide inclusive sanitation. We offer educational programs in sanitation with a focus on participants from low and middle-income countries. We are expanding rapidly and welcome new members. Interested? Contact us today, www.sanitationeducation.org.
Good morning from the beautiful city of Delft in the Netherlands. Welcome to the first edition of the Global Sanitation Graduate School keynote series on citywide inclusive sanitation. My name is Damir Berjanovic, professor at IG Delft Institute for Water Education, and I will be your host today. Starting from today, the keynote series will be scheduled every month. Each time, it will be hosted by a different member of the Global Sanitation Graduate School and will feature a wide range of speakers and topics. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce two outstanding individuals, my fellow professor, Mark van Loosdrecht from Delft University of Technology, and my former colleague, René Penay, Global Director of Water Technology Products at Royal Haskoning DHV. Mark and René, welcome to our program. It's my honor to have you with us today, and thank you so much for finding time for this event despite your busy schedule.
Thank you, Damir, and hello to everybody.
Yes, happy to be involved and join you in the graduate school.
Thank you, Mark and René. So the topic of today is innovation. The two keynotes will describe the winding road from invention to innovation from both the academic and business development perspective. Just a couple of notes before we start. Questions to our speakers can be placed at any time in the chat section and will be addressed in the Q&A session at the end of the program. And in order to join the live chat, you need to sign in with a Gmail or YouTube account. Now it's time to start, and I would like to invite Mark. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Damir. And it's a pleasure to discuss a bit our work and on developing of new processes and innovation. And I think the slides will come up soon. So I would like to talk about innovation from a university perspective, of course, because that's where I'm seated, but still on the interface between university and industry. So over the years, we have been working on several processes, some of which have been coming out of our lab right away, some that was going on together with companies. But there have been all the time more or less related to wastewater treatment. And the last years, we are now currently still busy with upscaling processes related to resource recovery in the form of bioplastics, Chimera, and Vivianite. Now, if we talk about innovation, we also have to have a definition for that. And the definition I prefer is the original definition by Schumpeter in 1934, where he stated that an invention is an idea made manifest. And that's what's happening usually at universities. You get ideas, and that are not by definition innovations. That are just bright new ideas. Innovation only arrives if that idea is in the end also applied successfully in practice, which effectively means that universities in itself should not be busy with innovations, but busy with inventions. And the innovation only arises when the university collaborates or transfers the ideas towards industry, utilities, or government institutes. And to illustrate that in the field of the water field, the idea to use membranes in wastewater treatment has been patented already in 1967 by Dor Oliver. It took, however, till 1989 before membrane bioreactors really got a push by Yamamoto, who realized that if you put the membranes not external to the reactor, but put them inside the reactor, it gives a big advantage. And that made that the MBR technology developed rapidly in the 90s with a lot of activity in the early 2000s. Clearly showing that an invention from Dor Oliver took a while before it was taken up and was really an innovation about 30, 40 years later. And what should also be clear is that inventions, they are nice, they are new things, but there should be really a strong benefit for an invention in order to become an innovation. Otherwise, the invention usually remains hanging at the university or at the person who has been thinking about it. If you think about innovation from an academic perspective, what is essential is that you are aware of three important aspects. There should be a kind of scientific question or curiosity. If you're busy with an existing technology and improve it, that hardly leads to innovations. You have to have some feeling to do new things, want to understand things which are not understood at that moment, and that generates knowledge which then can lead to new ideas. But at the same time, you have to be aware about where are the technological challenges for certain technologies which are in practice and where is the market demand. And that are questions like, why is something happening, or how can I do something, and can you use it? And the combination of understanding these three questions, that's what leads to innovation. As an example from our own work, we are quite interested in the microbiology, and one part of the microbiology are soda lakes, so lakes at a very high alkaline pH. Just want to understand what bacteria are there, how do they function, and what's going on, how can they survive in these extreme conditions. But at the same time, company Parks in the Netherlands was present, and also another company, Shell, and they, on one hand, were looking to methods to remove H2S from, in the case of Parks, from biogas. So there was a development to use the technology for biogas treatment, which is nice, but it's not a very big market. And the real market was in the end on the gas fields in Canada and other places where gas is extracted and H2S should be removed. And there the big impact was, and the technology is applied in the field and in a good market. It means that if you look to innovation, it's a kind of circular process. It's curiosity-driven knowledge gain, and initially when you are curiosity busy, it has no direction, no goal. It's just exploring. That generates knowledge, and then together with understanding things in practice, problems, that will generate the potential for innovation. And that is a directed process with a clear goal to achieve something in practice. Now, that curiosity-driven innovation examples from our own work, to illustrate that a bit. So we have been looking to biopolymers mainly for a reason to understand what is the reason why microbes make biopolymers. And that insight in why microbes make biopolymers helped in developing processes like the Nara process, where we'll talk about later, and I'm sure René will do too, PHA production, so bioplastics production from waste, and some other processes. There have been another aspect was the nitrogen gap. There has been regularly been mentioning in the literature that people looking to nitrogen removal systems and they report a nitrogen gap. Nitrogen is disappearing in an unknown way. But trying to understand where this gap comes from delivered the Anamox technology. For biofilms, there was the scientific interest in how do bacteria make a certain morphology, what's driving it. Is it the bacteria or physical conditions? And that insight in the end led to Nara and further on to Chimera. I will talk more about it. Then, of course, the alkaline microbiology I already discussed. And recently, we were just interested in how is iron turned over in wastewater treatment plants. And out of that interest, the Vivianite observations came. And now the Vivianite is also scaled up into technology. So that curiosity-driven part is very essential. And that's not always that easy to do in combination with industry, because it's far away and not on the current agenda. But the next step in the innovation, that is possible. Now, if you look to innovation in water treatment, then there are several drivers, and some drivers, they will always be there. That's like in making systems more compact, optimizing the nutrient removal or recovery, minimizing energy use or produce a little bit energy, reduce the cost of the system, and integrate the system better in its surroundings, like integrating the system at the treatment plant, but also in the city. There are several drivers which are often mentioned, which are, in my view, not really driving innovations in the wastewater treatment field. They are often mentioned like that, but that are energy generation, nutrient recovery, and decentralization. These three, they can play a role, but they will never be the main driver for introducing a new technology, unless there is a lot of subsidies. Then it changes, but subsidies have the tendency to be temporal, and then the driver moves away again. And if you want, we can discuss this later in more detail. Now, looking to innovation, I still see very often that depicted as a kind of linear process. There's someone who gets an idea at the research surroundings. That idea is picked up, going into pilot scale, and then going to the market. And actually, that's not really how innovation works. This sometimes works, of course, because it's not that this will not work, but it's not stimulating innovation, because essentially the person who has any ideas is not coupled at all to the market, has no link here. It's a linear process and is far away from the market, so does not realize if he or she gets an idea, if it's relevant or not. So that's why the so-called cyclic innovation model proposed a while ago, or already quite a while ago, by a colleague, Professor Berghout, where it's clearly visualized that it's a more cyclic process where the different players interact with each other, as well the scientific research as more the R&D, the development research. People who then make products and people who use the products are interacting with each other, and where also one entrepreneur is somehow driving the system. And what you see quite regularly, that there are technologies that don't reach the market. They hang around and they keep on being researched and investigated with some push, and that can be coming that there is just, for instance, a gap between scientific knowledge generation and really business needs. It means university is nicely working together with the market, who says, yeah, there's demand, and nicely working together with some developers. But really innovations never break through, because the really product creation is not in it, and that's very often because in the end, these systems have a very strong technical bottleneck, which is not looked upon, or they have simply no value. And I put here several examples from my experience, where sometimes you see things happening, but then they are not picked up by the market. But microbial fuel cells and forward osmosis are examples here. And one example in this field is the decentralized treatment. There's always a few interest for decentralized treatment already since wastewater treatment almost begun, but there are no really breakthroughs in this field. And for a large part, it looks nice to do things decentralized, but there's no really advantage, and that generates in the end no real breakthrough. And in the end, we should work on the optimal size, the optimal scale, rather than a scale for wastewater treatment. A nice example here is an example of decentralized treatment. That's the pharma filter concept, which is developed here in the Netherlands for treatment of hospital wastewater. This treatment system was not developed to treat the hospital wastewater. This system was developed because inside the hospital, people want to do different. Because they want to do different, they could not discharge their wastewater anymore to the sewer. It takes too long to explain that. And they got the obligation that if you want to do that, you have to treat your own wastewater. And in the end, they figured out that integrating that wastewater treatment with what they want to do inside the waste, the way you handled waste inside the hospital, is not only better for reducing spread of pathogens, but also better for the economy of the hospital. So that means that in the end, this treatment plant is simply paid. It's no extra cost for the hospital. but is easily paid by the savings of cost inside the hospital. So then there is a clear advantage and a market for it. The other error which regularly occurs is the distinction between technological capacities and societal needs. So, and this is, in my view, the membrane bioreactor an example. It's a nice new technology where engineers think this is a good product, we will go for that. There is a kind of, you need to do things better idea, but it costs more money. And the extra capabilities of an MBR is not balancing that extra money which the MBR costs. So there has been a big push, but if you look to the MBR market itself, then you see that there's always very positive predictions, and this is a bit an older slide, but you see already in that old market report that by 2008, 2010, the numbers are decreasing, but the prediction at that time was that 2015 we will have the breakthrough, and that is continuously generated. But in the end, the real breakthrough in the Netherlands was not to go for MBRs, but to put a sand filter behind the wastewater treatment, and you have the same effluent quality. And you see that then also in the amount of installations installed, that around 2010, the MBR market really peaked with new installations, and afterwards it's more or less going away again, because everybody builds a few, one or two MBR somewhere in the world, sees then the real negative aspects, and there's not a follow-up in the market. Now, as examples from our own research within this cyclic innovation model, that's what we somehow intuitively organized it in that way. We're not following a model, but we see that for the Anamox process, that was observed here in Delft in a pilot plant, which the university and DSM at that time were operating, realizing the potential for applying that in the treatment of reject water at the wastewater treatment plants, because there was increasing demand on nitrogen removal for the wastewater treatment plants. The program was set up between the R&D foundation from the Dutch Water Board, commercial company Parks, who could develop a reactor system around it, and a water board which would use that process. And in this way, we could scale up the Anamox process and in the time in a relatively quick way. We essentially scaled up the reactor from the lab scale, 15 liters reactor, immediately to a full-scale application without any pilot in between, because of this good combination and understanding what is needed to design a full-scale reactor. And that if you look to the development of the Anamox process, then you see that in the 60s and to 80s from last century, there were regular reports mentioning unexpected nitrogen loss, very often interpreted as nitrogen removal by nitrifiers or aerobic deammonification. In the 80s, there was the similar unexpected nitrogen loss in TU Delft, when then Arnold Mulder and Gijs Kunnen here got very curious and thought, now we need to know what's happening. And they saw the process of ammonia and nitrite being removed under anaerobic conditions. And that led to the recognition of the Anamox bacteria, together with the, at that time, need for all the water boards to improve the nitrogen effluent quality. Treatment of the reject water was a very logical step, and that made it possible to relatively quickly introduce the Anamox process as an innovation in the water market. And Anamox is now widely applied, mainly in the industrial sites, but also in waste for treatment of high and concentrated wastewater. Now, there is a demand for mainstream Anamox, and all kinds of processes are developed, but here there's no really breakthrough. And there are potentials to bring it into, but innovation in the municipal market is lagging behind despite huge efforts. And that's again due to the fact that if you really look to the advantages and you do a technical or economical evaluation, then there is some advantage, but the advantage is relatively minor if you apply Anamox in the mainstream of a wastewater treatment plant. Again, an example of a technology which is currently very driven by, say, engineers, but where the market side is a bit forgotten in the really need for Anamox in the mainstream. Now, another innovation, that's granular sludge. And I just assume that everybody knows, by the way, all the techniques I'm talking about, so I don't go too much in depth. But the granular sludge system that came out of our lab, and we also developed that, took care that it was developed, again, in a kind of partnership between the R&D department of the Dutch Water Boards, at that time DHV, that's nowadays Royal Haskoning DHV, and initially Waterschap Veluwe, and in the end, a few more water boards. Now, what the aerobic granular sludge came out of an original innovation in the industrial wastewater treatment, the Sircox reactor. That was a reactor which was designed in the made in the 70s, early 80s, based on growing biofilms on small sand particles in a completely mixed reactor. That's on the top right-hand corner. From that research, we got from that development, we got the research question: what makes now the morphology of these biofilms? What's behind it? What's the driving force? And why do bacteria sometimes make nice, smooth biofilms, and sometimes you get open, porous structures? And there we learned that it has partly to do with the fact that in certain conditions you get bacteria with low growth rates or other factors. And with that, we started to understand that we don't need that sandstone in it, which makes it also possible to operate the system in a different way, because the original reactor from the industry was impossible to scale that up to municipal wastewater treatment, simply because industrial wastewater can be run at a constant flow rate. Municipal wastewater you cannot run at a constant flow rate, and the constraints which set that to the Sircox reactor makes a Sircox reactor not feasible in municipal treatment unless you would have a constant flow rate. But that understanding it, then we could start to think, how can we design a system selecting for these slow growing organisms, and in that way not only to do that that we get a system for slow growing organisms, but also that we get a system with lower investment cost than the current installation. Because if you can decrease the investment cost, you have less problems with trying to convince people to buy your product. And of course, we not only want granules, we also needed to implement the nutrient removal with that, because that's crucial. So that process that led to the Nara treatment plant, this was the first full-scale implementation in the Netherlands, where we could build by DHV, and which showed that there's roughly 30% savings in capital cost, about 25% energy savings, and a very serious reduction in space, which means that you have advantages on investment, on your operating cost, and on the total land area needed, which is in urbanized cities very important. So that's very nice drivers for this technology. Now that granular sludge, and René will tell you more about it, I trust, but there's now roughly 80 plants in operation or construction, about 10 years after the first plant, which is for a wastewater plant rather fast, I would say. If you think that for planning of wastewater treatment plants, it often takes 5 to 7 years, and for the bigger ones, even longer, to between starting the planning and really construction. So that is quite delay. And that almost every country wants to have their own pilot plants first before they do a full-scale plant. Now, the largest Nara plant is currently in operation in Ireland. It's about 2.5 million population equivalents. So showing that within, say, 10 years, after the first relatively small implementation, it's now also implemented in one of the largest treatment plants in Europe. Now, that success was not coming overnight. That always takes time. As I mentioned, somewhere in the 90s, we're busy with PhD research on how do bacteria make biofilms. Now, at that stage, there was no interest in the, say, wastewater industry for that research question. We could only finance that by having money available from the science boards, where we could indicate to them that there's an interesting scientific question to solve. Once we got stable granulation in the lab, it took a little while, but then we could relatively quickly set up a close collaboration between the TU Delft and DSV, and start a program of further developing that, having in 2002 showing that we not only can do that on acetate, but also that we can do that on really municipal wastewater. And with that, say, proof of principle in the lab, a pilot series was started, and DSV started to engineer the reactor, because of course what we do in the lab is not a one-to-one replacement for what you do in the field. And that ended in 2012 in the first treatment plant. But that means there's already about maybe 20 years between starting some curiosity-driven research and a full-scale implementation. And I think within this field, that is still rather quick, fast, which means inevitably these are slow processes and take longer than one generation of PhD students, for instance. Now, what are success factors? On one hand, it's a relatively, in the end, simple technology. The first, the Merle de Kreuk, who was a PhD student in the time that we scaled up the research program, we did not need to apply for big fundings. The picture on the right-hand side was more or less the whole project plan when she started. So we did not have long sessions to put milestones and other things. We believed in it and we started to do it. And I think that enthusiasm is always very important. And that was essentially also made possible by Helle van der Roest at DHV, who played a very crucial role in the process of bringing all these partners together. Because bringing the partners together was another essential part, the water boards and STOA, to invest in the development and also to have a 10 years commitment without having a lot of milestones and other things, or go, no-go decisions. Was the agreement, we go and work on it and we commit ourselves for roughly 10 years to make sure that this can go from lab to full scale. And it was also important that it was patented. That's sometimes disputed in the water field, but I think the only reason what it is needed, maybe a little bit in the commercial phase, but certainly also in the development phase, because I guess that Helle van der Roest would not have been possible to get commitment from his management if he could not say the system is patented. Because then the management would say, yeah, we invest in it, and who in the end can get the benefits of it. And once it's patented, the management will feel more comfortable in allowing time and money to be used in the development of new technology. Now, there's certainly in this kind of processes, there are fail factors. And these fail factors, I see them around in the field. One of them is what I call a losing child factor. That is that an inventor, if you invent something, you work for a while, and 10 years later you see, oh, now we really have granules, and you're happy with it. You have a problem of let it loose, and you have to, as an inventor, at a certain stage, just let it go and don't interfere too much with it, because it's not your role. And now I missed yes, there's the thing back, not your role. The other problem is that within the university, there is rather a big focus on that. At least it seems there is a big focus on publications and citations. I think it's a bit overstated, but there is a strong link to that, which means there's not much interest of an academic professor to bring a technology to the field. It's even better to keep a technology as promising, because as long as a technology is promising, you can get money for research. As soon as a technology is in applied, the research foundations are already, there's a pilot plant, the research foundation will say, well, there's already a pilot plant, it's not new anymore. We don't need to spend much more time on it, and we better put our money somewhere else. And the industry typically has only money for doing the short-term research, solving problems. So from an academic perspective, there's even a kind of benefit not having a nice technology, but keeping it in the university as long as possible, because it's much easier to finance your research. It's boring, I would say personally, but it is a danger. What is also important for the success is that we have in the Netherlands a water board system. That means we have authorities which only task is to deal with the water. And that means that they are very much focused to do better what they are doing. In many places, the water is part of the municipal organization. And in that case, the town has many different problems and not only water. And so they have many different focuses. So if you come with something new in the water field, well, it's usually under the ground or outside the city where the sewer and the wastewater treatment plant is, and they're not that interested. The theater is usually a more interesting point to invest by a mayor. And the water boards have only one thing, and that's water. So if you come with something, it's part of their main focus, so it's easier to get them enthusiastic about new developments. And then it helps that in the Netherlands we have about 20 water boards, so there's always 20 chances that one of them is interesting in your new idea and at least gives it a chance. And that helps to bring in innovation, and that's probably also one of the reasons that there is significant innovations in the water field coming from the Netherlands. And at the same time, these 20 water boards work together in STOA by coordinating what they do. So it's not 20 independent organizations. They are independent, but they also work together, which is also essential for the ecosystem in the Netherlands around the innovation. Then about also another aspect which was important in the relatively short-term and decisions is that initially, if you go from lab to full scale, the regular route is you try in the lab, you build it a bit bigger. At 100 liters, you build it at 1 cubic meter, you build it at maybe 100 cubic meter, and you go stepwise through the system. Well, that means that each step you have a different thing and a different thing to solve. And it makes much more sense to go immediately from what you have in the lab to a full-scale design. Now, if you do that, that's a dangerous point, because also when we went the first time to the EHV, we said, well, this and this. Then they made a design for full scale and showed why it's not going to work. That's how it usually works if you come with a new idea. But if you know why it's not going to work, then you can work on it and adjust the process to that it will go and work. So you know where the bottlenecks are. You can solve these bottlenecks already in the lab by adopting the design, by adopting how you organize it. And then when you do the pilot plant, it's already focused on how the full-scale plant will be, and not a kind of magnification of what you did in the lab. And that process saves a lot of time in the development, because then you start already with something which is focused on full scale, and you don't get all the bottlenecks observed only later. You can quite well do that in model simulations and in detailed process design before. But it needs good discussion, and it needs clarification on the industry side. Not just saying it's not going to work, but declaring why it's not going to work. And that why question can then generate the ideas on how to do it. Now, also from an academic perspective, showing again how this a little bit works. So there were quite a few PhD students, Christian, Yannick, and Antonio, who worked on the process before it was called granular sludge. This was just trying to understand the morphology. What is going on model-wise and experimental. And then when we showed that, Merle de Kreuk was a PhD student in the time that we scaled up the granular sludge technology together with the water boards and DHV, and was very instrumental in translating the knowledge from TU Delft to the industry, and that meant that she also partly was present at the offices of DHV in regular time in order to link that. And that's essential, that some employee, either from the company or from the university, has a foot in both organizations. You don't do that knowledge exchange in formal meetings. You do that in the coffee machine or in some drinks after work very often. At least that's also needed. And then two further PhD students worked on further details of the project, and Mario is still involved in the developments and further implementation of Nara in practice. As I said, there were patents filed. These patents were already filed in 1999 and 2003, which from a university perspective means that, file for a patent, and for these processes it take a long time before they finally you get into the field and they might generate some revenues. So the patents were, from an academic perspective, not there to generate revenues. It's nice that it's a little bit coming, but it's mainly to make sure that companies can invest in it. So they're not there to protect the method and that only someone can use it. But if you want to scale up, it takes time, it needs commitment of higher management, and they in general are only committed if they have some feeling that they can get a return on their investment by some form of protection. This is all I'll skip. So with, I see that the slides have all been shifted a bit by implementing on this platform, but what's below that picture is stating that because when we came with granular sludge and when it started to become popular and wide known, suddenly quite a few people in practice came, we have also granular sludge, we've seen it before, which is true. And the point here is that an invention that you only recognize in an invention when you see it, and if you sometimes you might see granular sludge but not realize what you can do with it. Only when you see it and realize what you can do with it can become an innovation. And then later on you will see people who have seen it but not realized that it could have been an innovation on their side. Now, what is it didn't stop there, because we were still interested in understanding what makes now these granules. And if you look inside these granules, you see this fibrous network and this thread-like material, and we wanted to see what is that network. And that network is a biopolymer, what's called extracellular polymeric substances. And already that name, which is around in the literature for 50, 60 years, indicates that these polymeric substances are not really well described. It's substances, and they are polymers, and that is essentially what is known about it. But we got at the same time in contact with our polymer chemist who had a problem. They wanted to do something with alginate, but the alginate was too expensive, and we had a material which might behave a bit similar, which behaved like alginate, but as we later saw, was not the same as alginate. It just behaves like alginate. And that got their interest because this was way cheaper than alginate, and the application they will look after, they could be done with this polymeric gel. And we then started playing around in the lab, and we saw many more potential, and also the DHV and the water boards rapidly recognized the potential, and we could start a new innovation on trying to make a new resource out of wastewater, and one which potentially has high value, because alginate as a compound is a few euros per kilogram. And if you can get a few euros per kilogram for your waste sludge containing, say, 30% of this material, there's at least seems to be an economic driver. Now, we noticed that this polymer had very interesting material properties. It was a polymer which made it possible to make nacre. Now, nacre is the material from shells, from shrimps, crabs, and from mussels, etc. And that nacre material, people have been trying to reproduce it, and somehow we managed to do this in a very simple way, which was not possible, had been very difficult with other approaches. We also noticed that compounds made the materials heat resistant and fireproof. So you can put a Bunsen burner on it, get up to 2000 degrees, but it will not burn. It will char, but not burn. And we noticed that the material we make have very high tensile strengths well above the value for standard composite materials, and that it keeps its strengths up to around 180 degrees Celsius before it breaks down, which is also where most plastic starts to melt around 60 to 80 degrees. Now, besides that, we could use these polymers to make very nice, say, jewelry-like material, showing that you can make something very nice from what you flush through a toilet. And it's not by definition that you have to be at low end, dirty and smelly materials if you make something out of sewage. I'm sorry that the sheets are a bit messed up in this platform, but the point here, this is a bit more complicated innovation than the Nereda. When we developed the Nereda system, that could be done in an ecosystem of the water, which is existing. The water boards, consultant companies, construction companies, everybody knew each other already. Everybody was used to each other, how things work, and that gave a smooth introduction. For Camera, this is different because now we're starting to produce a product, and water boards are not really, water utilities are not really production companies. They are service organizations providing the service to treat wastewater and give some water back, clean water back to society. Now it's a really raw material which needs to find a market where we need to not only develop technology to recover the Camera, giving some ideas for products, but have to find companies which work together in developing these products, and also have to find economic ways to distribute the value equally over the partners in the value chain. And that is a extra, well, for me, interesting dimension, but that's an extra dimension in this innovation, that we not only have a strict, say, engineering innovation, but there's also now needed an innovation in market and value chain development, which is ongoing at the moment. The status there is that we started around maybe 2010 thinking about what is this polymer, and around 2012, 13, 14 maybe, I forgot exactly, we started to look around what can we now do with it. And 2 years ago, 2 years ago already, a first demonstration site for producing Camera was opened in Zutphen in the Netherlands to be able to produce a significant amount, because that was the real bottleneck. If you work together with industry, they need several kilograms. In order to produce several kilograms, you need a large installation, and you're a bit in a catch-22 situation that you cannot supply enough material, and the people who want to do something with it need that material. But right before Christmas this year, DHV, Chaincraft, a company which distributes the Camera, and Koppert, a company which then used the Camera in their products around plant growth and plant stimulation, signed a commercial agreement, which made that the first, say, value chain has been constructed, and there's now a first commercial line of converting wastewater in a real commercial product, which is more or less paying by itself, and hopefully in the near future generate profit, which then will derive or stimulate also development of many other applications. So why recovering it is important? Well, there is sludge reduction, because you recover 20 to 30% of the sludge as a polymer, which has a value of in the order of euro per kilogram. The remainder of the sludge, because you do the extraction in the alkaline conditions, is still very feasible for methanation. So in the end, in the total process, you still produce the same amount of biogas as in a conventional sludge digester would have done. And that is due to the alkaline extraction, where the alkaline extraction makes that the rest of the biomass which is remaining get more accessible for the methane producing bacteria. There is potentially positive earning model of Camera, and in the cost price for extraction is lower than of alginate, and we did not include in that the price of the reduced cost for sludge handling. It of course contributes to resource recovery from wastewater and contributes to the circular economy. These two last parts, they help in implementing it, but it's really the positive earning model and the reduction of sludge cost which will drive the innovation in the long run. Now, as a conclusion, what's important for innovation, I mentioned that throughout, but in a few things, there's need for partnering, and that means that university consultants, water boards, and companies, in the case of Camera, have to set up partnerships But within these partnerships, there needs to be a leader. If you are with 4 parties together and you are all 4 playing the captain of the development program, it will strengthen in some ways. There needs to be active leadership, which in the case of Nara was, for instance, very clear in the hands of Helle van der Roest, who then also makes sure that the whole innovation trajectory, development trajectory goes in a good way. What is also needed is the need for curiosity-driven research, because only curiosity-driven research gets insight which is outside what your regular thinking. If you do not have that, in the end, you will dry up with your ideas and you're only improving existing systems rather than coming up with something new. And the last part is have good problem definitions and understand that if you work on, for instance, sustainable development, that it sounds very nice, that is a reason for you to get money to do projects, but that in the end, the real practical aspects of cost or easier operation are much stronger drivers than having a sustainable solution. So try to do both at the same time, because then you get really sustainable innovations. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention.
Mark, thank you very much for timing your presentation very accurately, and thanks also for your very interesting presentation. I see questions are piling, but in our plan, we will now continue with René Penay and with his presentation, and after that, we have time for questions and answer session. Thank you, Mark, and see you soon back. So I would like to invite René Penay. Please start.
Thank you, Damir, and thank you, Mark, also for a great first presentation. And yeah, you mentioned Nara, of course, already a couple of times. Let's dive in a little deeper from our perspective, from the perspective of the engineering company, the business partner, and see how, from that perspective, the long and winding road for Nara unfolded itself, and how we are still finding new roads and new offtakes from it. Maybe it's nice to first start with some news clippings from the past 2 or 3 years. Last year we were bestowed, we won the Wastewater Innovation Project of the Year in the UK, together with a UK water board and partners there, contractors, for a small Nara, a package plant. And at the beginning of that year, Nara was actually, to our pleasant surprise, ranked by Global Water Intelligence, GWI, as the #1 breakthrough technology of the decade. And yeah, I mean, there's worse recognitions that you can get, I guess. The year before that, we won, and you see a lot of happy faces here, we won the title of Wastewater Project of the Year for the Nara installation in Utrecht, here in the Netherlands, also by Global Water Intelligence. And RHDHV was also named as Water Technology Company of the Year because of its innovations, and I think Nara was there leading the pack. And all of that maybe even is dwarfed by all the recognitions that Mark himself got. I mean, he's a modest person, but the number of prizes that he received for his contribution to wastewater research is staggering. And it's nice to ask yourselves, okay, how did this happen? How did we get there? And in my presentation, I would like to try and give some insights from our perspective as to how we got there. And it's actually three topics. It's product development, which defines how we got here in the first place. And Mark already spoke about the fact that some technologies do not make it to market or make it only very briefly to market, like MBR or the full stream Anamox, and others make it to market and appear to be very successful, like the Carousel or the Nara maybe. So it's interesting to investigate that perspective. Then the second part of the presentation, I will talk about how we stay in the game. And that has everything to do with how we do sales and how we do the delivery of our projects. And then, of course, if you have managed to stay in the game, it's also important that you stay ahead. And that part, and I call it continued investments, will be the third angle from which I will try and approach this long and winding road. So about product development, and here you see a nice picture of one of the Nara installations that we have. I think this one is a smaller one in Ireland. I think the first thing that really defines how you should look at product development in the water sector is that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Sometimes people think that on Friday afternoon you think of something, you have an idea, and that on Monday you have a product. No, it's not so. Mark already showed the timeline. I think it even started in the early 90s. I was told, and this was before my time within Nara, but I was told by very reliable sources that Mark at the Oktoberfest in Munich started with a bet and a question: can we create a wastewater treatment process that forms a stable biofilm by itself, without plastics, without external media? And that is what inspired this curiosity that Mark already spoke about. That is what inspired this research in the early 90s. And then if you look at the total timeline, indeed, in the mid-90s, early research started in Delft. We became involved around the year 2000. We built the first full scale for industry in 2005. The APE plant was opened in 2011 in the presence of our crown prince, now the king of the Netherlands, that you see in the small middle picture there. And last year before, we were named the breakthrough technology of the decade. So that is the marathon. It's not 5 years, it's not 10 years. That's 20 to 25 years that we are in this game. And you can think, okay, but that's because you are slow but truth is, in this sector, which is fairly conservative, it is rather quick. I think Mark already mentioned that. The sector by itself is conservative because it has a very important task, namely to ensure public health and a care for the environment. So you do not experiment with public health, and you do not experiment with the quality of the environment unless you really know what you are doing. And that is why it takes time to enter a new market. That is why piloting, proof of concept, meeting effluent standards throughout the seasons in different climates is so important. And I will get back to that later on in the presentation. How we got to the first full scale, this started in the National Nara Research Program, as we named it, together with Delft, the Dutch water authorities, and the STOA, the Foundation for Applied Water Research, is this cyclical innovation that Mark alluded to in his presentation. And I think that the word trust is key here. Mark mentioned that there were no contracts in the beginning, there were no milestones to be reached. There was a general sense of collaboration and leadership between the different parties. And I would think that the cement in that partnership is trust. That extending trust to each other was key in making this happen. With that trust also comes the respect for each other's position. Delft is on the research and the development, on R&D. The water boards are the operators. They own the asset. They have the responsibility to treat the water. And then RHDHV, Royal Haskoning DHV, we were the engineers. We had the capability of bringing it from pilot to full scale and then take the decision to actually build it. So that respect for those different roles, I think, is key. It's also why I'm a firm believer that the water board should not take on the role of selling a technology worldwide. It's not in their remit. They need to take care of the water quality in their own command area. It's also why I think that the university should not become the entrepreneur that sells products that they patented. No, they should do further research and develop it and leave it to the private sector to conquer the world with the product. I think this respect for each other's position, combined with the trust in each other, makes the cement of a partnership. And there is a very nice, I'm guessing that most of you in the audience, you are engineers like we are, like I am. There is a very nice, almost mathematical equation, the trust equation, that helps you understand how you can build trust. That to some it comes natural, but this one actually shows that mathematically that trust increases with credibility, reliability, and intimacy between the partners, which of course sounds logical, but it's not easy to maintain in a marathon, huh? And I trust you realize that. And the trust decreases if you are overly self-oriented. And that is also a very, very important recognition. And I will get back to that in our partnerships later on in the presentation as well. But I would invite you to think about this and maybe it is of help and support to you in your own ventures and development later on. The trust equation, highly recommended. Today, well, this is actually from 2020. Mark said over 80. In 2020, it was 88. I think today it's 94 or 95 full-scale Nara projects worldwide. And we treat together those treat more than 10 million person equivalents. We are in over 20 countries. And by now, we are covering a full range of climates. Very cold, Sweden, in the north of Scotland, or in Switzerland and high altitudes, to very, very warm, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Brazil. So I think by now we have met with conditions, wastewater conditions, climate conditions across the globe, and I think it's nice to see this exponential growth. It's a near perfect growth, and I think it's about 30% year on year that we are seeing, which we hope we can continue. And I honestly hope that we will meet the 100 mark this year, and then we will celebrate. Mark, and you are invited, and Damir, you are invited too. To illustrate globally where we are is here it says already 90. It's in the US, it's in Brazil. If anyone asks what are we doing in the middle of the ocean here, I think that's on Hawaii, and I still need to go there and visit the site. A lot in Europe, and also Asia is becoming becoming more important ever. From product development and how we got here to treating more than 10 million people and past the 100 mark this year, to the second angle, which is the sales and delivery. Here, I think we made a very important decision 10 years ago, just after the opening of APE, when we had the first full-scale installation in the Netherlands. And at that time, we also had pilot installations already, one in Portugal and one in South Africa. We made a very, very important decision to the success of the rollout. And that is that we decided to do this, to try and conquer the world with a network of partners. Because a network, and that's also a mathematical theory, allows for exponential growth more easily than if you would do it all yourself. It also amasses the creativity, the inspiration from each partner in the network to each other. And it allows to use local, very specific knowledge about a market, about conditions in that market, about the competition in that market. So we made a very conscious choice to use a local network. And here you see this, an illustration of the network nodes, how they can develop. I trust that you understand that it was meant to be animated, but that this platform didn't allow that. This partnership, and you see some examples here in the pictures, that also required us to think about how we would deliver this technology to our clients. You know, there are several choices to be made there. You can say, okay, we design it, we design and operate it, we design and build it, we design and build and finance it. There are several models that you can think about. And we made a conscious choice to stick to where we believe our added value is the highest, and that is in the design and the delivery of the technology, not in pouring concrete in Brazil or in China or in the US. There are local contractors there who can do that much better than we can and much cheaper than we can. So I think here, and if you now think back on the trust equation, we reduced our self-orientation. We made our share smaller, and we decided, let's invite partners who can do things better than we can, and let's allow them to also be successful. Let's extend them a license, and we work together in that partnership, and then we probably can create more speed and have a faster market introduction than when we want to do everything ourselves. And this is the decision we made. We decided we will stick to our technology package, and we will license the technology to partners, either asset owners, water companies, concessionaires, or large EPC contractors who build and operate the plants. And I think that was a key decision that helped the fast market introduction that we experienced. Today, this global Nara community, with the founding partners here at the upper right corner, Delft and the STOA, this global Nara community that spans many of the important markets in the globe, and we are still expanding. Yeah? We have partners from Australia to the US, from Brazil to Scandinavia, and these partnerships are ever growing. You see here all these logos, and the nice thing is my team, our Nara global team is in daily, if not hourly, contact with most of these partners on all the projects that we carry out around the globe. So it's a very, very active network, and that, I think, is a key to success. Here you see a nice picture of a global community, Narita Global Community Gathering in Brazil. It's unfortunate, of course, that over the past 2 years we have not been able to have these events, but I'm hopeful that we can hold one this year if we come out of this pandemic. I think another key element in the sales and delivery question is the decision in which markets to play. Early on, around the time when the Narita plant in April was opened, early on, we had a strategy of selling the Narita in those countries, in those places around the globe where we had an office. This is the inside out perspective, saying, okay, and if you think about it, it might make sense. You say, okay, we have offices in Poland and in Israel and in South Africa and in India, so let's sell the technology there. Yeah? That was not successful. What we should have done, and we started doing that at the same time when we began with the partnerships, what we should have done is turn it around, take the outside-in view, and say, which of these markets are the most interesting in terms of demand, in terms of procurement strategy, in terms of potential partnerships. And the first market that popped up then was Brazil. And we didn't have an office in Brazil. We did not have partners in Brazil. We did not have a network there, but that is what we developed. And today, Brazil is one of the most successful countries with Narita installations. I think we sold 14 there. So it's not where we are, again, the self-orientation, make that smaller. It's not where we are that drives the decision. It's where we need to be, where our key features of the technology matter the most. And as Mark already alluded to in his presentation, the Narita combines qualities that are easy to sell, small footprint, low on energy, no or hardly any chemicals, produces a very good effluent quality, and is therefore altogether cost-effective and easy to operate. So it's a good product, but even sometimes good products don't sell if you do not think about the markets where to play. Some of you may remember that Philips had a great video system, Video 2000, that it never sold. Sony was much more successful with their VHS and other systems. Why? Because of the market perception, the market recognition of the technology. It's not the inside-out thinking that makes a product successful. It's the outside-in thinking. Then when you sell the first ones, and we now step over to delivery, I think you sell the first ones in a market after piloting, and this is often a long process, but you sell the first ones based on promises and maybe on blue eyes, but you sell them on trust. But then after the first one is in a market, whether in the Netherlands or elsewhere, you sell the next ones by delivering, actually showing that the technology works, that you deliver on your promises. And that part, I think, is all the more easily forgotten. It should work really well. And I think the example that Mark gave about the MBR, that you saw a decline after a peak in 2010, is this element, that its performance was less than expected, actually. And I think continued growth requires that you keep delivering on your promises. One of the things that we do there is make use of smart software. Our installations are full with sensors, and there is a very smart AquaSuite software platform that we developed behind it, with which we can actually optimize the system, work towards a stable performance, and then also take all those data back and improve our design again. And I think that's a key element that intelligence, that optimization of your technology is often forgotten. Certainly in the water sector, many of the installations are still fairly old school, non-intelligent, without elements of the Internet of Things, without smart sensoring, without a software that helps improve the performance. The third chapter is about how we stay ahead, and I named that continued investments. Actually, it's this saying that I like a lot, and that okay, now we are here where we aim to be, but hey, is that all? No, we didn't come this far to only come this far. You want to stay ahead in the game. You want to keep improving, and you all know that many of those improvements are less obvious. You take your iPhone. The iPhone 12 looks a lot like the iPhone 6, but it's not the same phone anymore. We all know that. Try and run those apps of today on the iPhone 6, and and the cameras are different. So there's a lot of innovation. The Naritas of today are not the Naritas that we built 10 years ago. Actually, they are maybe almost a different product, or at least have very, very different qualities by now. And that, I think, is the third realization, that what keeps us ahead in the game is innovation. It's not the patents that are the best defense. Patents will not protect your position in the market. Patents are very good and very useful in your marketing when you need an investment decision, as Mark already said. I think without a patent, indeed, we would have found it very difficult in the early 2000s to say, okay, let's invest a few million in the development of this technology. So that investment decision is supported by a patent. Likewise, when we build a partnership, when I go and talk to a potential partner, a large EPC contractor or a large water company abroad, and I can show them that this technology is protected, there's a patent or more patents behind it, that will help them take the decision to become a licensee. That is true, and that is important, but the patent will not protect our position in the market. Our position in the market is only protected by making our product better. iPhone would have been out of the market if they had stopped innovating after the iPhone 6. The only way for them to stay in the market and to stay ahead of the game is to keep developing their product. And in that sense, the best defense is actually a good offense. And, in my spare time, I like to box. Not that good at it, but it's a good workout, and that's why I put the gloves in, I think. So how do we do this innovation? Yeah, there's a lot of lab research going on, and then you have pilot plans, and you see some examples here. We have several ranges from lab scale to full demo scale. I think the one on the right is here in Utrecht in the Netherlands. It's 1,000 cubic meters. We do a lot of research for the Narita in different configurations. The package plans, I already mentioned in the right lower corner. We got this award last year for best innovation in the UK, but we also do a lot of research into parallel configurations, hybrids. There's a picture of the Ringsend site in Ireland. How we can improve our capabilities of retrofitting installations. So there's a lot of research going on behind the screen, if you like, of what we call the Nara technology. There's also research going on into new demands of the market. Can we remove micropollutants? We got questions. Can the Nara remove COVID-19? You get all kinds of questions from the market, and the answer to COVID-19 is no, it cannot. But we do a lot of research in these markets. And the interesting part is, this is also again where the network comes in, that some markets are ahead in some parts of the demand side. Say the need for reuse of water has become earlier and more apparent in very dry climates, in very dry weather conditions, California, Israel, Spain. Now reuse is becoming important in Western Europe as well, and in large parts of Asia, and we can learn from the experience in those drier areas that started sooner, earlier with research into reuse. And this is where this power of the network, of this network that we built, becomes manifest. I think that network can faster exchange experience and knowledge than if you would do it all yourself. IT, of course, building examples like building digital twins, that is, I think, the future. We now have apps on the phone where operators can follow how their Nara plant is doing. They can see that every hour of the day, like I am watching the energy consumption in my home on an app from the energy producer. Which is of course a very powerful tool, and we keep constantly developing this, and it's this type of innovation that will keep us ahead of the game. And in these continued investments, we also continue our partnership approach. The Nara partnership was not a one-off. We firmly believe in this model, and just to show an example, and I see Mark here in the back standing next to me, but the person in front is one of the directors of a water authority in the Netherlands, and he holds high this innovation award that we won for Caumira, the biopolymer that we are extracting from the Nara sludge that Mark mentioned. And actually, right after this presentation, I'm driving to the Caumira site in Zutphen to meet a delegation of Brazilians who are visiting there today, the plant, because they are very interested in using Caumira for a biostimulant in Brazil, where the agricultural areas are very, very high. So I think the partnership is what we have learned to really value, and I think to us that's the key to our success. So back to where we started. I touched on 3 subjects: the product development, which made it possible to get where we are now, how we stayed in the game in our sales and delivery model, and then how we try and stay ahead through our continued investments. To me, this trust is central to all of that. And now I don't hold any shares in this book, but there is a book called The Speed of Trust, which is written by Stephen Covey, who is the son actually of his father, Stephen Covey, who wrote a book on the 7 habits of very effective people. But his son wrote a very nice book on trust. And there's a quote there from the book says, "Nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. Nothing is as fulfilling as a relationship of trust. Nothing is as inspiring as an offering of trust. And nothing is as profitable as the economics of trust. Nothing has more influence than the reputation of trust." So speaking of business, and we are responsible for the business of Narita. We sell it around the world. We deliver the technology. We are a commercial company, but the economics of it, I think, are very much dependent on softer factors like trust and partnerships. And with that recommendation, if you like, for this nice book, I will leave you. So thank you for your attention, and I would say back to you, Damir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rene, very much for your masterclass on developing and bringing innovation to the market. So now we are at the stage where we would like to ask you and Mark to help us answering the number of questions here. Let me just remove this, so that's much better now, like that. And we have a number of questions, so I will try to group them, and they will appear on the screen, and you decide how you will answer them. And I would like first to start with a bit more general group of questions. This is one from Tina, so everybody can read it, and probably both of you can give us a little feedback on this. So we are talking about non-sewage sanitation, and how would what would be your advices to many innovators in that field, which only started, let's say, with rapid developments in last decade or a bit longer than that?
Shall I start?
Yes, please, Mark.
Yeah, so what you see very often is that people who design, say, decentralized sanitation or non-sewage sanitation do this very much as a sanitary engineer. And they try to develop technology which works, which fits, but they don't think how it will be implemented, who is going to use it, how the user will have benefit from doing it, and how the user will be convinced from that benefit of the use. And that means it's a bit an isolated technology, saying, well, you want clean water. Here is something where you can get clean water. Maybe for the person who has to implement that decentralized sanitation and would have to clean it or keep it running, it has all kind of other problems. So if you could link it into better context that the user in the end sees the benefit of using it, and not because it's an ideological good idea to do non-sewage sanitation or whatever, but because they see the advantage, and that's important. And then you have to think about economy. And I think the problem is that on one hand, yes, things cost money, but I think treating wastewater is cheaper than your mobile phone, and most people even in the non-sewered areas, have mobile phones. So they clearly see a higher advantage of the mobile phone than of the sewer system or of a non-sewered sanitation. So you really have to try to think what will drive people. And therefore, I think that the pharma filter is a nice example, because that was not developed because the hospital wanted wastewater treatment. That was developed because the hospital wanted to deal in a different way with their waste, which would save them a lot of money inside the hospital. And then they developed a decentralized system which suited their needs. And together, that package made effectively a much better wastewater system. So you will have to think about your surroundings and not just develop some technology and then hope that people will use it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Rene, you were, let's say, some time ago in my office here in Delft, and
Yes.
we discussed about the future, and you were interested in innovations, and you were going around different universities. And so connecting to this question, what would be needed in the non-sewered sanitation? So the innovations which are developing there, what do we need there to make you as an industry interested in that?
Yeah, I will answer it from a business or economic perspective, not from a technical perspective.
Sure.
Yeah? I think there's two things. The nice thing, it's only two. Huh? But the downside is that they are difficult to reach. But there's only two, in my view. It's the willingness to pay from the public for a service, which is, say, the cell phone that Mark just mentioned. People are willing to pay for the cell phone. Yeah? I even understood that for example, in Africa, Heineken, the beer manufacturer, saw the cell phone as a competition, because if people do not have much money to spend, they have to make it a choice. You buy beer or you buy a cell phone. Yeah. So willingness to pay is one thing, and I think people all around the globe, is my experience, and I've been in many places. I've been lucky to be in many places. People all around the globe are willing to pay for access to clean water, drinking water. It's much more difficult to instill a willingness to pay for treating of wastewater. So that's one element of this difficult equation, willingness to pay. The other is, if you want a business to become interested in taking up a product and earning money with it, you need a cash flow. You need to make sure that there is a cash flow that this business can use, that this business can earn. Many of the benefits of wastewater treatment are economic, but they are macroeconomic. They are benefits to the environment, benefits to society. They let people live longer. There are benefits that reduce the burden on the health system. But this is macroeconomics. A business does not earn money with macroeconomics. A business earns money with cash flow. So you have to think of how, if there is a willingness to pay, how can you turn that into a cash flow for your business? Those are the two questions you need to answer.
Thank you, René. So
and maybe adding that, so there's not so much to advocate sewer or non-sewer, because that's a local issue. But for me, one of the things around Camera is, for instance, that if we can create products which really have a demand for this kind of polymers, then that if Camera could at least pay for the operating cost of a treatment plant, that you do not need taxation and financial complicated schemes to run the plant, but that the people who are at the plant own their salary from the sales of the product in the end, that would, for instance, increase the uptake of wastewater treatment in general.
Exactly. And then you have the cash flow, because you can sell the product,
yes,
which gives you the cash flow. That's exactly it. Or what you see in many markets is that the water companies responsible for the wastewater treatment, they add a percentage to their bill for drinking water in order to pay for the wastewater. That is also creating a cash flow for a service that people maybe are not willing to pay for.
Yeah, but the problem is then often that money also has to end at the wastewater treatment plant and not in between somewhere in the town budgets. And
exactly.
But okay.
So it's not easy, but it's these two things for the business Damir.
Yeah. Thank you. So I would like to connect then with the question from Patrick, which so probably it's again for both of you, but maybe Mark can start first. What are the areas, by your opinion, of innovation, and specifically related to non-sewer sanitation? I know that your field is a sewer sanitation, and maybe it's a challenging question, but in general, what is your feeling? It's good to hear.
Yeah, so on one side, that comes a little bit back to that curiosity thing. I think that in this field, people have, for pit latrines or for basic sanitation, people do that in order, motivated mainly by providing this basic sanitation. But I don't think anyone ever looked what are now the processes in a pit latrine. what's going on inside, and just some curiosity-driven research, because very often that in the end generates some insights where you then can use that, and you don't know in a front what or where. But that more curiosity-driven research is absent in this field because people are mainly motivated by, say, doing good for the earth and society. What is important is that because certainly if you do on-site sanitation, that you really have, as I mentioned before, that you really have good understanding of the local community, what drives people. And in some cases, you can easily, and you might even drive on prestige. You just make a nice, fancy looking thing instead of a dirty hole. And people get motivated to show, look, I take care. And that's, you make use. People sell bottled water, which is 500 to 1,000 times more expensive than drinking water. But people are very happy to put a bottle with a certain label on their table, with water in it, with lower quality and much higher price. So prestige could also be used in order to get things introduced. But then you have to design things a bit better than a dirty hole in the ground. It's just thinking a bit what motivates and drives people. And maybe also coming back to that, I think for on-site sanitation, that has to emerge almost from the local societies, and that companies like Royal Haskoning DSV, they cannot drive that. They can, at a certain moment, there are good examples, provide the repetition, see, okay, that works. Now let's use our infrastructure to spread it. But I don't think that these things have to emerge from the local communities, and because there people know what is going on.
So definitely the issue is much broader than just technology. Technology is a part of solution. And
yes,
what you are saying, guys, is we have to look in the bigger picture, and in order to continue and to move innovation even faster from the invention to practice, there are many elements that have to fit together.
Yeah,
So,
I think
yes?
I think one, if I can add, Mark in his presentation he mentioned a very, very interesting aspect about the situation in the Netherlands, where the water authorities are only responsible for the water, and that the monies that they earn, they reinvest in water, which is different from many countries where provinces or municipalities are responsible for all basic infrastructure. In that case, it's not so apparent that government funds are spent on water. That the mayor or the town council may decide to spend money on a school or on a theater, as Mark mentioned. So I think one aspect that is really important, and it relates to Carlos Lopez's question that I see in the screen, is the institutional environment. It's the technology, which is maybe driven, the development of technology, which is maybe driven by curiosity, what is happening in a pit latrine. Then there's the business question. Okay, would a company be able to make money with basic on-site sanitation? Is there a cash flow that you can think of? And it may be possible, you never know. But then there's the third element, which is, okay, and how is the sector organized? What role does government play? Is it a stable institutional environment? Does that institutional environment allow for a marathon of many years? Or is it so unstable that you can only do sprints, and therefore you cannot reach the developments that you want to have? So this third part, how is government organized? How is the relationship between the parties in the sector, is also very, very important. The governance question is also key.
Thank you, René. So let's go back to Nereda, and there is a question from Ronald. Probably René. Yes, René.
Yes. Yeah. I see the question, and the answer is twofold, Roland. First of all, in my presentation, I mentioned in in one of the slides that an important factor for success for us has been that we selected the markets where we want to play. Now, with the Nara that you saw, that's in the large sewer infrastructure market for large municipal installations. That's where we can be successful, or maybe for large industrial sites that use a lot of water. We made a very conscious choice not to go with Nara to non-sewer markets with only basic sanitation for the size of villages, because we knew we could not compete on cost level with basic sanitation like pit latrines or similar. Yeah? So that's one aspect. So with the full-scale Nara, we are not going into those markets, Roland. What we have developed, though, and this was the innovation that won the prize last year, is a smaller package plant Nara for a size of maybe 1,000, 2,000 people that we can put in rural areas, but it serves a different need than basic sanitation. It serves maybe the need of drought. So we can use the effluent to replenish aquifers, or to use it for irrigation and agriculture, or it can help improve the effluent requirements in rural areas in Europe, where effluent standards are becoming higher and higher, and the cost of improving existing infrastructure, existing wastewater treatment plants are too high. So we do have packaged Naradas, but again, we choose the markets where we want them to be applied. And I don't think Nara is a good product for basic sanitation in rural areas in developing countries. For that, we need to develop a different product and a different solution, which requires the technology, the cash flow, and the institutional environment to be successful.
Thank you for that clarification, René. I would now ask Mark to address the question of Anthony.
Yes. Yeah, so of course, I put it a bit stronger than in reality is. But what you quite often see, that's not just for academics, but it's for everyone who get a nice idea. It's difficult to give that idea away in hands of other people. You like to take care of it. You like to make sure that it works. And yeah, very often you are not the best one to, after you generated the idea, to drive that idea towards the market. There's other people who might do that more efficient. Yeah, and in the university, for me, it's very simple. If you are too much under constraints from press that you have to get this funding or you have to do that, and then you keep it. It's easier to keep things a bit. You don't on purpose keep them promising. By the way, I don't think anybody does that, but there is some benefit in it of doing that, and that's yeah. And I think if you look inside universities in general, people are in general very open, but most people don't go out too much. That's they talk within their own field, and for that it makes sense. Of course, it should be a task also of the universities to communicate what they are doing and go outwards, but it's only a few people in the organization who do that. And that means that also on the other side, people who are looking for solutions could make use of just hanging around at the university now and then and see what's going on. And from there, pick up ideas and develop. So it's a two-way approach.
Yeah.
And so I overstated a bit to challenge it. I don't think it's that black and white as I mentioned it. But there is a certain aspect in that, and yeah, and it's really for me it's a problem for those technologies. It's always a bit difficult to blame things or to point out, but it's easy to use an example, not to point that example out, but this illustration, the use of algal ponds for wastewater treatment is something which is going around already since I would say the invention of wastewater treatment. And still, if you come with the idea that you want to use algal ponds for wastewater treatment, that sounds, as very attractive, because you use nature, it's very nice, and why shouldn't it must work? It's such a good idea, it must work. So it's relatively easy to find funding. But then nobody who gives funding, or those people who then want to make the algae ponds, start to look back and realize, why didn't it work in the past and how I'm going to solve this. And they start again with trying to make an algae pond, and after several decades find that there's the same limitation again. And that looking back and being critical on why things don't work, that is more important than trying to keep things inside the university or something like that. And there sometimes could be, because in the end then people are busy, they get funding, they can claim, well, we have this nice project on this very natural solution for wastewater treatment, which everybody thinks is a good idea. But if you then don't work on the critical factor, it's a bit loss of money and brains. And it could be better used, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
I think maybe Damir, I can still add something from the business perspective. I think this is this funding question from Anthony. I think this is also something where patents play a role, but not in the sense that it's important to file for patents and to get them approved. But once you have a patent, that is an asset that you can trade. And there, I think, there are good opportunities for many universities who nowadays have a valorization department that needs to generate money from the private sector to fund investments. There they can actually trade the patents, and that's actually also what DHV, Royal School in DHV, did with the University of Delft. We actually acquired the patent in return for continued funding of research. So establishing a patent and then seeing that as an asset that you can trade can also inspire funding and can be a continuous factor for research. So actually you could turn the question around, and you can say that letting go of the patent is actually a good way to be able to continue your research.
Thank you, René. I have one question on my own. I was puzzled with your slide in which you mentioned your blue eyes. I know you have a blue eyes, and I know people trust you and to your promises in general. But not everybody has blue eyes and your image internationally. So what would be your advice to young innovators, to startup companies? How do we get this first launching customer? Because it's like getting the first job. Everybody asks for experience. And then how do you get that experience? Who will employ you first? So what is the advice on how to launch the technology for the first time, so that you can get next to these promises also evidence that it works and people start really trusting you because you have evidence?
No, this is the key part, and you're very kind in saying that I am trustworthy and blue eyes, and I'm not sure if that is entirely so, but thank you for that. I think the answer goes back to the trust equation. So in the upper part you have 3 elements: credibility, reliability, and intimacy. So let's explore those. Reliable, even as a young entrepreneur or as a young researcher, what you do has to be reliable. You should not cheat. You are in it for the long run. You should be truthful, honest. What you do should be reliable. Intimacy, you should build a close relationship, and this is not meant as a Me Too intimacy, of course, but you should really, be intimate with your partners in understanding what their needs and their businesses are. So if you are a researcher in a university, you should actually try and understand what drives a business person. You should not have a different emotion like looking down on business or looking up at business. No, it's about understanding. So that's the intimacy part. And then perhaps key in those early days for a young entrepreneur or young professional is the credibility. Yeah? Of course, you don't have gray hairs like you or no hairs like I. So, you still need to build the credibility. Now, this is where the partnership can come in. If you don't have the credibility yourself, surely there is a professor at your university or there is a trusted partner elsewhere that you can find who you can actually ask to join you to a meeting, to advise you, to introduce you. So you can build this credibility by partnering. So that's my take on this answer. And then in the denominator, in the number, in the denominator, there is the self-orientation. So don't be arrogant. You may be the best young entrepreneur ever, think you are bigger than Elon Musk, or you may be the best professor, think you are bigger than Mark van Loosdrecht. Don't think so. Yeah? Try and be modest, not to be overly self-oriented. If you combine those things together, then I think you stand a good chance of building this trust. Yeah?
Thanks, René. So I think the boss was posting this question during the Mark's presentation, and I think this is a question for Mark. So it's about definition of invention and innovation.
Yeah, so I really believe that. I really believe that innovation is something which helps society. And of course, market is a bit broader than pure economy. In the end, there has to be someone paying for it, but there must be benefit for society, which means that either through taxation or due to direct economic value, society is prepared to pick it up. And if that's not happening, then it's an invention, and that's also very nice. But I personally keep innovation limited to there where you really have to break through. That's why I also say in general that universities are not meant to do innovation. They are part of the innovation landscape, but they are not the innovators. The innovators are, in the end, some entrepreneurs who pick up the idea and make business out of it, like Helle van der Roest, who did that with Nara.
Right. So Mark and René, I would like to stay with you on one technical question. So it's about co-treatment of fecal sludge or septic sludge with the municipal sewage, which is happening a lot also in developed world, but even more in developing countries. And that is a relationship. That is in relationship to the questions of before, when René said no, the NAREDA is not for rural and too much decentralized sanitation, but this is now application of AGS under developing conditions. So how do you see that, and do you see that some additional research is needed before you enter, or do you have already such situations like in Brazil and other places where this is already the case?
Yeah, maybe I take that first from the practical point of view. We have NAREDAs now in over 20 countries, and many of them developing countries outside Western Europe or the US, India, Brazil, China. We have them under various climate conditions, under various affluent conditions. The variability, actually, I would say is better dealt with by the granules than by normal activated sludge, and probably Mark will build on that later on after I've concluded my response. But the way I see that, Roland, is that this granule that these bacteria build themselves actually protects them from shocks in the environment. We have a lot of information, we have a lot of data. I remember that we put sensors, analyzers in all these Nara tanks across the globe, so we get terabytes and terabytes of data in every day. We analyze them. We know that the Nara environment, the granule, reacts better to shocks, say salinity shocks or pH shocks or any other spikes in the influent, that the Nara granules actually react better, more robust to those shocks than normal activated sludge. And Mark, surely you have an explanation for that from the scientific point of view.
Yeah, so I think so as René said, in principle, biofilms and granules are also biofilms. They are more shock resistant. Maybe it's also good to remember that there was a demonstration near Nara before the first full-scale plant in the Netherlands, in Gansbaai in South Africa,
Correct.
which actually received a lot of septic material, maybe half the load or 2/3, I don't know exactly, but it operated perfectly. So the first larger demo test was on a plant with a lot of
Fecal
material brought by truck to the treatment plant from latrines, etc. So in principle, it works. There might be still optimization and other things needed. That's something different. Coming back to René, so I think the development of package plants is very useful because it makes it more convenient, more cheap to just buy a package plant than a special design plant. You can it's repeatable. Makes a rollout. You can then apply it at a point where you have to apply it, but you will have each time to look which I would see on the longer run that there's a market with 3 or 4 different types of package plant, one granular sludge based and maybe a few others, where you, depending on the type of wastewater, where there's a lot, how diluted it is or not, and what the requirements are on the water you get out of it, can solve a lot of the local village or compound problems.
Yeah, great.
So I think we are coming closer to the end of this program. And as a last question to both of you, Mark and René, it's Tina's question. When you look into the whole process from technology development level or readiness level 1 to 9, which is this scale that we follow, and when you look in your experience and looking back in all the decades of the research work and then business development, what would you say from your experience, what are the bottlenecks in this winding road towards innovation? Where are the biggest obstacles from you, Mark, as an academician, and also from you, René, as a business developer? Maybe we start with Mark.
Okay, yes. Well, I think in the end, probably one of the biggest bottlenecks is build a team which is needed, where the trust is and where there's a good leadership. That must almost always be a natural leader and not someone who got appointed because he or she worked for one of the organizations. That must be, because it's very personal skills related and not representing your organization. And that's probably one of the more difficult parts, to get that in a good way together. Because that's, you can at a certain moment have a fifth wheel on the car, or you have the wrong person in the driver's seat, etc. And I think there's one of the, and from the academic part, it's very often realization what are the real problems in practice. That's very often not done well or not thought about. And maybe on the practical side, people are not always capable of defining the right question. They say it's wrong, it doesn't work, or it will not work. But if you say that something will not work in practice, you should also be able to explain why it will not work, because then an academic person can work on it. If you just say it will not work, it sounds like you're just conservative and don't want change.
René?
Yeah, I fully agree with Mark. It's all about the people. I think in my presentation about the business side of this, I think this was all about the soft factors. So I fully concur. And what makes that even more apparent, what underlines the importance of that, is that it is a marathon and not a sprint. You are in this, if you want to do this, for, say, a decade or 20 years, not for a week or 2 weeks. So having this partnership and building this team over a longer period of time makes it even more important to get that right. Yeah? And you will encounter a lot of obstacles in 10 or 20 years. Yeah? And then you have to overcome them and keep going. And that spirit, or it's a can-do mentality. Yeah? It's not a mentality of, okay, we see problems, let's stop. No, it's a can-do mentality that you need in the team. Yeah, this is drive, leadership, partnership. Those are the important parts. Yeah? Then you succeed. Yeah, you don't succeed by spreadsheet management, huh?
Yeah, that's for sure. So I think at this point, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our keynote speakers of today, Mark van Loosdrecht and René Nopenay, for inspiring us with your story in the first edition of the Global Sanitation Graduate School keynote series on citywide inclusive sanitation. I would also like to thank 2 colleagues from IG Delft who worked very hard at the back end of this program, Dr. Konstantina Velkushanova and Dr. Francisco Rubio Rincon. Words of appreciation go to our supporter and partner, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Please be reminded that the second edition of the GSGS keynote series will take place in February and will be hosted by Meru University of Science and Technology from Kenya. More information will follow soon. Finally, I would like to thank the audience, students, alumni, and staff members involved in the Global Sanitation Graduate School and all other individuals for being with us today. Recordings of today's session will be available for viewing at the Global Sanitation Graduate School YouTube channel. So thanks to everyone, and till our next event, all the best and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you, Damir.
Bye-bye.
See you.
The Global Sanitation Graduate School is the world's largest platform for capacity building in citywide inclusive sanitation. We offer educational programs in sanitation with a focus on participants from low and middle income countries. We are expanding rapidly and welcome new members. Interested? Contact us today, www.sanitationeducation.org.